foods high in carbohydrates like grains and the taro root tended to be fermented. But nevertheless, the basis of the diet was animal foods. Here you see the octopus and the crab, and they ate the whole animal. They will eat the organ meats of the crab. They will take the shell and grind it up and add it to their food for calcium. They had pigs on the island, and the pigs were cooked in underground pits, and they ate the whole animal, including the fat and the organ meats and the head and the skin and everything. This young man is having a snack, which he did not get from a vending machine. He's eating a delicious fatty sea worm. Once again, the same pattern. Those who had been introduced to Western foods, usually by the missionaries, and Dr. Price was a devout Methodist. He taught Sunday school, went to church all his life, but he became very disillusioned with the missionary program, because he recognized that it was the missionaries who were bringing in the foods. And they were the wedge that introduced these. And because people looked up to the missionaries, they thought, well, we want to eat like them also. And the first thing that happened was the rampant tooth decay causing a tremendous suffering. And then in the next generation, the altered facial structure, the narrowing of the face, the crowding of the teeth. And what else has happened? Those beautiful smiles have disappeared. And these two young people have an expression on their faces of someone who thinks he's been cheated. They have a chip on their shoulder. And they have been cheated. They may not be able to put it into words, but they've been cheated of their birthright of physical perfection. That's the birthright of every single human being born on this planet. And to make sure that everyone has that birthright is a partnership. It's a partnership with the Creator. The Creator provided the blueprint, and we have to have the wisdom to provide the right building materials. And I do believe that this sense of not being given what we deserve to have, which is an attractive, healthy body and a keen, clear mind, is the root of so much unhappiness and violence and addiction and depression and so forth among our young people, especially in this generation. These photos were taken in a tuberculosis ward in Hawaii. Every single child in this ward had dental deformities. Now, the dental deformities were not the cause of the tuberculosis, but the same conditions that prevented the optimal expression of their genetic potential made these children very susceptible to diseases like tuberculosis. Dr. Price studied the Aboriginal people in Australia. Those living in the bush were noted for their strength, agility, their stamina, their keen eyesight and hearing. These are Aboriginal women who have never been to the dentist, never used a toothbrush, but their teeth are so perfect they look like false teeth. The diet of these people is fascinating. There's a long article about it on our website. They had both plant and animal foods, and we see the same things, the same themes, a tremendous emphasis on the fats. If they killed an animal that was too lean, they threw it away. And then they ate a lot of grains and legumes in this diet, and these were all prepared with great care, usually by soaking them in running water for about 2 weeks before they prepared them. And once again, the same pattern. Those who became modernized had tremendous tooth decay. Those who remained and stayed in their native lifestyle had good, strong teeth well into old age. They died with good teeth. And then the next generation, the altered facial structure, what Dr. Price called the underdevelopment of the middle third of the face, quite sunken in here, and then the crowded teeth and overbites. Dr. Price went to Africa. He went into the interior of Africa and to parts of Africa that had very few white men had been before. And here he could not get over what he found. He found 7 tribes with 100 or more members in every tribe and not a single cavity, zero cavities in over 700 people. Even those who filed their teeth as a custom did not get cavities. And he found 0 dental deformities. Beautiful, broad facial structure among the Africans. Now, his African experience allowed him to compare different diets practiced by the same racial group, 3 different diets. The first diet was the diet of the herding people, like the Maasai. They kept cattle and goats, and their diet consisted of milk, meat, and blood. There were virtually no plant foods in this diet. It was a very high-fat diet. The warriors at their prime consumed about 1.5 gallons of milk, usually raw fermented milk, every day, which gave them the equivalent of 3 sticks of butter fat a day. 3 sticks of butter a day. And yet they had no heart disease. The second group was the hunter-gatherer. They did not milk animals. They did not keep animals. They hunted and fished and collected plant foods. These people also had no cavities. They were very sturdy and strong. They had a sacred food, which was liver, which was so sacred they only touched it with their swords or their spear tips. But it was a mixed diet. Then the third group were the agriculturalists. They did not keep animals. They did not hunt. They grew corn, beans, and squash. They were not vegans, however, because a very important part of the diet was insects. There was only 10% animal food in this diet, but it was a very nutrient-dense animal food of insects. Now, these people, the agriculturalists, did have a certain amount of tooth decay, about 6%, and some of the older folks were toothless. They tended to be shorter and not as strong, not as robust as the other 2 groups. They were dominated by the other 2 groups, and they tended to be overweight as well. They were certainly healthier than his patients back in Cleveland, but they were not as healthy as the other 2 groups. Between the herders who had no plant foods in the diet and the hunter-gatherers who had a mixed diet, Dr. Price found that those with the mixed diet were actually stronger and had better proportions. And so his conclusion from the African experience was that the ideal diet avoids the extremes between too much animal food and too much plant foods. It's somewhere in the middle. And, you know, it could be more in this direction, more in this direction. But I think that's good news for us because it means that we don't have to have some kind of extreme diet where we're only eating steak or we're only eating, you know, rice. But it's a mixed diet that creates the best health. Here are, this is the Maasai, very, very tall. These are the herding people. But no matter which diet they started on, none of these groups was immune to the ravages of the displacing foods of Western commerce, causing the tremendous tooth decay and pain. And then in the next generation, just took 1 generation for this to happen, the narrowing of the face and the altered facial structure. This photograph perfectly illustrates the difference between this is normal facial structure and what we would call a modern face, narrow face. You can see that there's a lot of strength in the bones of the face, the cheeks, the dental arch, whereas this face looks like it's not supporting itself but sort of hanging from the skull. And this is an adjustment that the body makes, a compromise that the body makes when the building materials are not sufficiently strong. We see here a dental cast. This is an adult primitive person, and this is an adult modernized person. So looking from the front, you see what you see here is beauty, strength, and order. And what you see here is chaos, weakness, what Dr. Price called physical degeneration. And we know from animal studies that if this type of diet that causes this continues for 2 or 3 generations, you end up with no more reproduction, no more humans or no more animals. So the situation really is very serious. This is why we're so passionate about what we're doing. We're on the precipice here. We're at the 11th hour. We're on our 3rd generation of this type of diet. And what are we seeing? Rampant infertility, heartbreaking infertility, and more health problems in our children. Many children not reaching adulthood. I've included some architectural diagrams because the principle of building a strong, wide arch in architecture is the same as the principle of building a strong, wide arch in the body. It's strong building materials. a study that was done on cats by Dr. Pottinger. He looked at cats over many generations, and he found that if he gave cats a deficient diet, and the diet for each species is different, when he gave them a diet that was deficient for cats, over several generations, they developed a lot of behavior problems, health problems. They developed digestive problems, and then by the fourth generation, there were no more cats. They stopped reproducing. So this is what the typical dentist sees in his practice today. All of these deformities, and the dentist might say it's due to thumb sucking, or it's because you didn't breastfeed, or because heredity. But it's none of these. It's really what causes this is poor nutrition leading up to pregnancy and in the womb. And you can tell when a baby's born what kind of facial structure he has and whether that baby will be prone to dental deformities. The first bone that is affected by poor nutrition in the body is this bone. It is the maxilla, or upper jawbone, the bone that forms the middle third of the face. Almost every other bone in the body touches on the in the skull, touches on the maxilla. The next bone that is affected is the mandible, or the lower jawbone. And here we see the skull from the back. Here's the maxilla. And this beautiful bone is called the sphenoid. It looks like a butterfly, and you can just imagine, in order for that bone to be broad and broad and wide, it has to be strong. Otherwise, the body will build it more narrow. And by the way, there are little cavities up here in the skull where these important organs sit, like the hypothalamus. There's little depressions in the bone. So if the skull is narrow, there won't be as much space for these important glands. So I'm going to finish this rather lengthy introduction with a few pictures of my own. This is an American woman who was born in the southern United States in the 1920s. And she has beautiful facial structure, naturally straight teeth. The kind of face that we associate with the the old-fashioned American beauty. And she did not have to eat cod's head stuffed with chopped cod's liver or sea worms or anything yucky to get this bone structure. She grew up on foods that we can all embrace, starting with whole raw milk. The family lived next to a Jersey dairy farm, and they had plenty of raw milk. Lots of cream and butter in the diet. No one told them it was bad for them. A lot of seafood in the diet. They lived on the water, and they had crab and fish. And fish eggs were an important food in the diet. The shad roe they ate every spring. Beef, pork, chicken, and lamb. A lot of chicken broth, fruits and vegetables. This was a time the family didn't have a lot of money, so they weren't spending their money on sweets and candies and so forth. So, this is a diet that we can all embrace. And that's one of our messages, that the diet that's nutritious can also be delicious. We don't want you to think there's a big yuck factor in a healthy diet. This gentleman grew up on a farm in eastern Texas. If you look at the space between the eye and the outside of the head on both sides, this is not a three-quarter view. This is a front view. He has beautiful facial structure. He was an orphan. He was raised on his grandfather's farm, pretty much neglected. He said the goats and the mules were my mother's, and he actually suckled milk directly from these animals. He said if he found a crawdad in the stream, he had to eat it raw right there, otherwise someone would take it from him. He said, I got the leavings. I was not allowed to eat at the table, and so the livers and the chicken heads and the gizzards and the feet is what I grew up on. So the most nutrient-dense parts of the animals. And this gentleman is still going strong in his 90s after a very colorful life. For many years, he made his living as a card sharp and a bootlegger. He had a very keen mind. He could take a deck of cards and mark them up, surreptitiously. And within 10 minutes, he said he knew what every card in the deck was from the back of the card. This is Agnes MacPhail. She's a Canadian. She was a great reformer and champion of women's rights. Now, the Gaelic face genetically is more narrow than, say, the alpine face or the African face, but that you can still see the wonderful bone structure here.